What happens when the hero becomes the villain? If you've ever banged your head to peace cells, screamed along to Symphony of Destruction, or found comfort in the rage and rebellion of thrash metal, brace yourself. This is the story that no metalhead ever wanted to hear. According to veteran music journalist Michael Rodriguez, who has followed Mustaine since his early days, this is not just the end of Megadeth. It marks the final chapter in one of metal's most tumultuous and influential careers. What's truly staggering is not only the severity of the sentence, but the speed at which everything fell apart once the investigation began. The revelation comes just as Mustaine was experiencing a career resurgence thanks to Megadeth's Grammy win for their 2016 album Dystopia and the critical success of their recent album The Sick, The Dying, and The Dead. Sources close to the band have confirmed that their upcoming world tour has been abruptly canceled, with millions in ticket sales now being refunded. The music industry is reeling from this shocking conviction, and the financial impact is devastating, as revealed by an anonymous senior executive at Universal Music. But the human cost is even greater. Band members, road crews, and venue staff worldwide are suddenly without work, not to mention the victims whose testimony ultimately brought this case to justice. For those unfamiliar with the details of the case that has dominated metal news outlets for months, Mustaine's downfall began with what initially appeared to be a routine investigation into financial irregularities. However, as authorities dug deeper, they uncovered a disturbing pattern of predatory behavior spanning several decades. This was all carefully concealed behind the volatile, rebellious persona that fans had come to expect from the metal icon. To understand the gravity of Mustaine's crimes, it's important to first recall his extraordinary journey in heavy metal. After his infamous dismissal from Metallica in 1983 due to substance abuse issues, Mustaine formed Megadeth with a vengeful determination to surpass and outshine his former bandmates. Dave turned rejection into rocket fuel, says former Megadeth drummer Chuck Beer. Driven by a need to prove Metallica wrong, Mustaine channeled that chip on his shoulder into creating some of the most technically impressive thrash metal ever. Through albums like Peace Sells, But Who's Buying? And Rust in Peace, Dave Mustaine solidified his reputation as one of metal's most distinctive guitarists and songwriters. His snarling vocals, politically charged lyrics, and blistering guitar work helped Megadeth amass a devoted global following, with sales exceeding 38 million records worldwide. Despite personal struggles with addiction and a string of controversies sparked by his inflammatory statements, Mustaine maintained his place as a metal icon. His career, however, was marked by constant lineup changes, with over 20 musicians cycling through Megadeth's ranks, something that critics later pointed to as evidence of his controlling and volatile nature. Despite these challenges, Mustaine eventually achieved sobriety and even overcame a cancer diagnosis in 2019. His story was often framed as one of redemption, notes music journalist Michael Rodriguez. It was a narrative of overcoming personal demons, finding religion, and maturing into an elder statesman of metal. Yet this conviction has shattered that carefully constructed image. The investigation into Mustaine began in 2021 when a former method came forward with alarming allegations of financial exploitation and abusive behavior. Initially, the complaint centered around unpaid wages and hazardous working conditions, but as the investigation progressed, it revealed a much darker picture. Lead prosecutor Rebecca Williams explained that what began as a labor dispute soon evolved into something far more troubling. Multiple victims came forward with similar stories spanning decades about Mustaine's abuse of power within the music industry. These individuals had remained silent for years, fearing retaliation due to Mustaine's immense power and reputation for vindictive behavior toward critics. Former Mead guitarist Marty Friedman, who had largely stayed silent about his reasons for leaving the band in 2000, provided testimony that stunned longtime fans. According to Friedman, working with Mustaine was psychological warfare. He described the contrast between the public Dave, who could be charming and brilliant, and the private Dave, who used people's vulnerabilities against them and seemed to take pleasure in watching others suffer. Friedman recounted incidents that went far beyond typical band dynamics, including allegations that Mustaine sabotaged opening acts who received too much praise from audiences. He allegedly had their sound intentionally botched, equipment mysteriously damaged, or set times cut short. Friedman stated that Mustaine's pathological need to dominate everyone around him was undeniable. Perhaps the most damning testimony came from former bassist David Ellefson, whose own controversial departure from Megadeth in 2021 had made headlines. Ellefson admitted, "I spent most of my career making excuses for Dave's behavior." His words underscored the toxic environment that had been perpetuated for years within the band, ultimately contributing to the unraveling of Mustaine's legacy. David Ellefson testified that he had convinced himself for years that Mustaine's behavior was simply a result of artistic temperament or the pressure of maintaining the band's legacy. He admitted he was wrong and that his silence had allowed harm to others. As the investigation deepened, prosecutors uncovered evidence of more serious criminal behavior. Multiple women came forward with allegations that Mustaine had used his position of power to coerce young female fans into compromising situations backstage at Megadeth concerts throughout the 1980s and 1990s. Detective Sarah Johnson, who led the investigation, stated that the pattern was consistent and calculated. Vulnerable young fans, often dealing with their own substance abuse issues, would be singled out, separated from their friends, and promised special access or industry opportunities, only to find themselves trapped in situations they could not easily escape. The prosecution presented damning evidence, including backstage passes with specific notations, journal entries, and, perhaps most shockingly, a series of Polaroid photographs discovered in a storage locker rented under a pseudonym linked to Mustaine. Digital forensic experts testified that the photos, which spanned from 1987 to 2004, depicted individuals who appeared impaired or unaware they were being photographed. Prosecutor Rebecca Williams explained that these weren't merely the excesses or typical backstage behavior people associate with rock stars. Instead, they revealed a systematic pattern of identifying and exploiting vulnerable individuals, with the evidence kept as trophies. Former tour manager Ray Wilson provided further testimony about the elaborate system that facilitated and concealed Mustaine's behavior. He described a code used by certain crew members, including specific colored passes and terminology that indicated those involved knew what was happening. Those of us who knew had to make a choice, stay silent or lose our livelihoods, Wilson stated. I'll have to live with the choice I made for the rest of my life. The revelation sent shockwaves through the metal community, leaving many artists grappling with the stark contrast between the musician they had once admired and the predator described in court. Metallica members James Hetfield and Lars Ulrich, whose complex history with Dave Mustaine has been widely documented, released a joint statement expressing their horror at the revelations. "We are devastated by what has come to light," the statement read. While our personal and professional relationships with Dave have been complex over the decades, we never imagined the extent of the harm he was causing. Our hearts go out to all victims, and we urge others with information to come forward. Kerry King of Slayer, who had toured extensively with Megadeth during the Big Four thrash metal shows, also expressed his shock during a press conference. "We all knew Dave could be difficult. That was just part of his reputation," King stated. "But there's a world of difference between being a difficult bandmate and being a predator. If I had known what was happening, I would have done something. That's what haunts me now." The case prompted a broader reckoning within the metal community about the behavior that had long been normalized or dismissed as just rock and roll excess. Several major festivals and record labels quickly announced new protocols for backstage access and reporting mechanisms for inappropriate behavior. Music industry analyst Jennifer Blake explained, "This isn't just about one person's crimes. It's forcing an entire genre to examine the culture that allowed this behavior to continue unchecked for decades. The sex, drugs, and rock and roll ethos has often provided cover for what we now recognize as serious criminal behavior." Throughout the trial, Dave Mustaine maintained his innocence, with his defense team arguing that the allegations were either fabricated by disgruntled former employees or were the result of consensual interactions being reinterpreted through a modern lens. Attorney Robert Coleman portrayed Mustaine as a scapegoat for industry-wide behavior that was once accepted but is now condemned. Dave Mustaine is being judged by 2023 standards for behavior that was commonplace in the 1980s and 1990s music industry, Coleman argued. He's being singled out because of his fame and his outspoken nature, while countless others who engaged in identical behavior faced no consequences. The defense brought forward several character witnesses, including musicians who had positive experiences working with Dave Mustaine. Mead guitarist Kiko Loureiro, who joined Megadeth in 2015, described Mustaine as demanding but fair and completely professional. "The Dave I know bears no resemblance to the person being described in these allegations," Loureiro testified. "He gave me an opportunity when many had written him off, and he always treated me with respect." Mustaine himself took the stand, cutting an imposing figure with his trademark red hair, now streaked with gray. He categorically denied the most serious allegations while acknowledging that his behavior had sometimes been difficult and demanding. "I've never claimed to be perfect," Mustaine stated. "I've battled addiction, I've said things I regret, and I've had conflicts with bandmates. But I have never, ever engaged in the kind of behavior I'm being accused of. These allegations are either misunderstandings or deliberate attempts to destroy me by people with grudges and financial motives." However, the jury remained unconvinced, deliberating for just 9 hours before returning with a guilty verdict on all major counts. As the verdict was read, witnesses described Mustaine's expression changing from confidence to disbelief to rage in a matter of seconds. It was like watching the different sides of him that witnesses had described all play out in real time, said courtroom reporter Michael Chin. The mask dropped completely, and for a moment, everyone in that room saw exactly what the victims had been describing. The sentencing hearing 3 days later was equally dramatic. Several victims delivered powerful impact statements describing how their encounters with Mustaine had affected their lives. One woman, identified only as Jane Doe No. 3, described how her experience backstage in a 1993 concert had led to years of substance abuse and trust issues. "I came to see my musical hero and left with wounds that have never fully healed," she stated. "I blamed myself for decades, believing I had somehow invited what happened. It's only now, hearing so many similar stories, that I understand I was targeted and manipulated by someone who had perfected predatory behavior." When given the opportunity to speak before sentencing, Dave Mustaine remained defiant, maintaining his innocence and suggesting that he was the victim of a conspiracy. "I've made enemies throughout my career by speaking my mind and refusing to conform," he stated. "This is the price I'm paying for that honesty. History will vindicate me even if this court won't." Judge Eleanor Ramirez was unmoved by Mustaine's statement, and in delivering the maximum possible sentence, she cited not only the severity of the crimes, but what she called a complete absence of remorse and a high likelihood of reoffending if given the opportunity. "Mr. Mustaine, the evidence presented demonstrates not isolated incidents, but a calculated pattern of behavior spanning decades," Judge Ramirez stated. "You used your fame, your power, and the loyalty of your fans as weapons. The court finds no evidence of rehabilitation or even basic acknowledgement of the harm you've caused." As Mustaine was led from the courtroom in handcuffs, the metal world he had helped define for nearly 40 years was left grappling with his legacy. Streaming services reported a significant drop in Megadeth plays, while radio stations worldwide pulled the band's music from rotation. The Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, which had never inducted Megadeth despite their influence, released a statement confirming that Mustaine would never be considered for future inclusion. For the legion of fans who had followed Mustaine's career through its many ups and downs, the news was particularly difficult to process. Social media was flooded with conflicting reactions, ranging from shock and disbelief to others claiming they had always sensed something disturbing beneath the surface. "I've been a Megadeth fan since Peace Sells, but who's buying?" said longtime fan Robert Johnson. "I've defended Dave through controversies, lineup changes, everything. But the evidence presented in this case, I just don't know how anyone can still support him. It feels like finding out a family member has been living a complete double life." Dave Mustaine's journey from thrash metal pioneer to convicted criminal carries important lessons about power, accountability, and the dangers of unchecked celebrity worship. It reminds us that artistic brilliance can coexist with deeply disturbing behavior, and that the music industry has too often prioritized talent and profitability over basic human decency. More importantly, it demonstrates how powerful figures can construct public personas that effectively shield them from consequences, sometimes for decades. As one victim advocate noted, the problem wasn't just Mustaine. It was a system that prioritized entertainment value over safety, that elevated musical genius over moral character, and that dismissed victims' voices as the cost of doing business in rock. The case sparked important conversations about fan culture, with many Megadeth devotees struggling to reconcile their love for the music with the crimes of its creator. "Can I still listen to Rust in peace knowing what I know now?" asked one fan in a widely shared social media post. "Does appreciating the art mean I'm somehow excusing the artist?" These are not easy questions. Music critics and ethicists have weighed in on this dilemma, with most suggesting that there is no universal answer. Each person must make their own decision about separating art from artist, explained cultural critic Rebecca Torres. "What's important is that we no longer allow artistic contribution to serve as immunity from consequences." As the metal community continues to process this shocking fall from grace, one thing remains clear. The story of Dave Mustaine will forever serve as a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked power, the importance of believing victims, and the responsibility we all share to hold even our heroes accountable. In his final statement before sentencing, Mustaine quoted his own lyrics from Megadeth's Symphony of Destruction. "Just like the Pied Piper led rats through the streets, we danced like marionettes, swaying to the Symphony of Destruction." The irony was lost on no one. The man who had once warned of the corrupting influence of power had himself become its embodiment.